Judge. Thank you very much. Judge, Professor, before I begin my questioning, notice there are a number of people sitting behind you. Are any of them your family members you'd like to introduce?
Well, actually, my family members haven't arrived yet. Yes, they have. They're outside the door. They weren't here for my statement.
Well, we will make room for your family to be able to sit.
It's a very large family,
well,
Senator.
We will begin, but attempt to accommodate as quietly as we can what may be an unusual arrangement. I might ask, is everyone who is sitting behind you necessary and to sit behind you, and maybe they could stand and let your family sit? But we will, I would assume the reason why, to make it clear, the reason why your family is not here at the moment is that you did not anticipate coming. So if those who aren't absolutely necessary would stand with the rest of our staffs and let family members come in. Now, and we'll try to get a few more chairs if possible, but we should get this underway. My Lord. Will staff try to get some chairs? Did you get some chairs? Staff just began to carry some chairs out over there so we can. Let's bring out chairs, whatever you have. All right? I would ask.
Well, you all can stand.
We may at some point, Professor Hill, attempt to accommodate either your counsel and/or your family members with chairs down the side there. They need not all be up front here. We cannot completely reconfigure this situation, okay? Fine, we can put them in the back as well. Now, would you, there are two chairs on the end here, folks. We must get this hearing moving. There are two chairs on the end here. We will find everyone a seat, but we must begin. Now, Professor Hill, at the risk of everyone behind you standing up, would you be kind enough to introduce your primary family members to us?
Okay. I'd like to introduce, first of all, my father, Albert Hill.
Mr. Hill, welcome.
My mother, Irma Hill.
Ms. Hill.
My mother is going to be celebrating her 80th birthday on the 16th.
Happy birthday in advance.
My sister, my eldest sister, Elretha Lee, is here. My sister Joanne Fennell, my sister Carlene Gilcrease, my sister Joyce Baird.
I welcome you all. I'm sorry?
My brother, Ray Hill. I think that's everyone.
Thank you, Professor.
I'm sorry.
Please.
I would also like to introduce my counsel at this time.
Yes, that'd be appropriate.
Mr. Gardner, Ms. Susan Roth, and Mr. Charles Ogletree.
Thank you. Now, Professor, Thank you for your statement and your introductions. And I think it's important that the committee understand a little more about your background and your work experience before we get into the specific allegations that you have made in your statement. I understand, as you've just demonstrated, you come from a large family, and I've been told that you've indicated you're the youngest in the family. Is that correct?
Yes, I am.
Now, I assume that, like all families, they've been of great help and assistance to you. Let me ask you, tell me again your educational background, for the record.
I went to primary, elementary, and secondary school in Okmulgee County, in Morris High School, Morris Junior High, and Irwin Grade School. It's in reverse order. I went to Oklahoma State University starting in 1973 and graduated in 1977 from Oklahoma State University with a degree in psychology. In 1977, I began attending Yale Law School. I graduated, received my JD degree from there in 1980.
Now, what was your first job after graduation from law school?
I worked at the firm of Wald, Harkrader & Ross.
How did you acquire the job? And that is a Washington law firm.
That is a Washington, D.C. law firm.
And how did you acquire that job?
Through the interviewing process. The first interview took place at Yale Law School. I was interviewed for that job. I don't remember the names of the interviewers. I was called to Washington for an interview in the office of Wald, Harkrader & Ross. I was interviewed by a number of people, and I accepted an appointment with them. Now, I will say that that interview process was preceded by work that I had done with them as a summer associate. And so the interview process the second time around was really, well, actually, I'll say that the interview process took place before the summer associateship. And then at the end of that summer associateship, I was asked to work there full time.
Who was your immediate supervisor when you were at that law firm?
Well, a number of individuals. I worked with a number of different attorneys on different projects.
So it would depend upon the project you were working on?
Yes.
Now, what type of work did you do while you were at the law firm? Was it specialized, or did you do whatever was asked of you of any of the partners?
Well, since I worked there for only 1 year. I was a fairly new associate. Most of my work was basically what was available and when I had time available to do it. However, I did some federal trade work. I did some environmental law work there, and I participated in the drafting of a manual on banking law while I was there.
Now, did you decide you wanted to leave that law firm, or was it suggested to you?
It was never.
Did someone approach you and say there's another job you might like, or did you indicate that you would like to leave the law firm to seek another job?
I was interested in seeking other employment. It was never suggested to me at the firm that I should leave the law firm in any way.
How old were you at this time?
At the time, I was 24 years old.
Now, why were you dissatisfied at the law firm? Why did you want to leave?
Well, I left the law firm because I wanted to pursue other practice other than basically the commercial practice, civil practice that was being done at the law firm. I was not dissatisfied with the quality of the work or the challenges of the work. I thought that I would be more personally fulfilled if I pursued other fields of the law.
Now, again, were you approached as to the opportunity at the Department of Education, or were you aware that there was a potential opening and you sought it out?
I spoke only with Clarence Thomas about the possibility of working at the...
Excuse me. How did you get to Clarence Thomas? That is my question.
I was introduced to him by a mutual friend.
Was the mutual friend a member of the law firm for which you worked?
Yes, his name is Gilbert Hardy. He was a member of the firm at which I worked, Waldhart, Grader, and Ross.
So you had expressed to Mr. Hardy that you would like to move into government or move out of the practice. Were you specific in what you would want it to do? I
told him only that I was interested in pursuing something other than private practice.
Now, some of the activities of the Office of Civil Rights at the time were pretty controversial. We heard testimony, in fact, about the fact the office was under a court order to change its practice for carrying out its duties, and some have suggested that Mr. Thomas had done an exemplary job in changing things. Some have suggested otherwise. Did the controversy surrounding the office detract from your interest in taking this job, or did you consider it?
Oh, I certainly considered it. I considered the fact that there was talk about abolishing the office. I considered all of those things, but I saw this as an opportunity to do some work that I may not get at another time.
Did you think this was a good job?
Pardon me?
Did you view this as a good job, or did you view this as an intermediate step?
I viewed it as a good job, yes.
Can you describe for the committee your duties, initial duties, when you arrived at the office of, at the Department of Education and doing in the civil rights area? What were your duties?
My duties were really special projects and special research. A lot of the special projects involved commenting on Office for Civil Rights policies. It involved doing research on education issues as they related to socioeconomic factors and so forth. Was
Judge Thomas your direct supervisor? Did you report to anyone else but Judge Thomas at the time?
I reported only to Judge Thomas.
So at the Department of Education, your sole and immediate supervisor was Judge Thomas?
Yes.
And what was your title?
Attorney advisor.
Attorney advisor.
Yes.
Now, did you have reason to interact with Judge Thomas in that capacity very often during a day?
We interacted regularly.
Did you attend meetings with Judge Thomas?
I would attend some meetings, but not all of the meetings that he attended.
Perhaps you'd be willing to describe to the committee what a routine work day was at that phase of your career in working with Judge Thomas.
Well, I'm not sure that there were any such thing as a routine work day. Some days I would go in, I might be asked to respond to letters that Judge Thomas had received. I might be asked to look at memos that had come from the various offices in the Office for Civil Rights. If there was a meeting which Judge Thomas needed to attend, that he wanted someone there to take information or to help him with information, I might be asked to do that.
Where was your office physically located relative to Judge Thomas's office?
His office was set off down the hall from mine. Inside his set of offices, there was a desk for his secretary, and then his office was behind a closed door. My office was down the hall. It was separated from his office.
Can you describe to us how it was that you came to move over to the EEOC with Judge Thomas?
Well, my understanding, I did not have much notice that Judge Thomas was moving over to the EEOC. My understanding from him at that time was that I could go with him to the EEOC, that I did not have, since I was his special assistant, that I did not have a position at the Office for Education, but that I was welcome to go to the EEOC with him. It was a very tough decision because this behavior had occurred. However, at the time that I went to the EEOC, there was a period, or prior to the time we went to the EEOC, there was a period where the incidents had ceased. And so after some consideration of job opportunities in the area, as well as the fact that I was not assured that my job at the education was going to be protected, I made a decision to move to the EEOC.
Were you not assured of that because you were a political appointee, or were you not assured of it because, tell me why you felt you weren't assured of that?
Well, there were two reasons, really. One, I was a special assistant of a political appointee, and therefore I assumed and I was told that that position may not continue to exist. I didn't know who was going to be taking over the position. I had not been interviewed to become the special assistant of the new individual. I assumed that they would want to hire their own, as Judge Thomas had done. In addition, the Department of Education at that time was scheduled to be abolished. There had been a lot of talk about it, and at that time it was truly considered to be on its way out. And so, for a second reason, I could not be certain that I would have a position there.
Now, when you moved over to EEOC, can you recall for us, to the best of your ability, how that offer came about? Did you inquire of Judge Thomas whether or not you could go to EEOC? Did he suggest it? Do you recall?
I recall that when the appointment at the EEOC became firm, that I was called into his office, and I believe Diane Holt was there too. And Diane Holt was his secretary at Education. We were there, and he made the announcement about the appointment and assured us that we could go to the EEOC with him.
Now, when you went to EEOC, what were your duties there at EEOC?
Well, my duties were really varied because it was a much larger organization. There were so many more functions of the organization. My primary duties were to the office, being the liaison to the Office of Congressional Affairs and the Office of Review and Appeals, so that I reviewed a number of the cases that came up on appeal to make certain our office had given proper consideration. I acted as a liaison to the press, sometimes for the chairman's office through Congressional Affairs and Public Relations. I had some additional responsibilities as special projects came along.
Did you have as much occasion to interact personally with Judge Thomas at EEOC as you had with him at the Department of Education? No, we were much busier. We were all much busier, and the work that we did was work that did not necessarily require as much interaction. A lot of times at the Education Department, the work required some, there were policy decisions that were to be made, and we were trying to do an evaluation of the program. So there was more interaction at that time. At EEOC, there were just projects that had to get out, and so there was less of an opportunity for interaction. Who was your immediate supervisor at EEOC?
At the EEOC, initially, Clarence Thomas was my immediate supervisor. After a period, Alison Duncan was appointed to be the director of the staff. Initially, the staff consisted of 2 special assistants, myself and Carlton Stewart. The staff eventually grew to a larger number of assistants, and Alison Duncan was brought up from the legal counsel's office to take control of that situation.
Now, how long were you at EEOC with Judge Thomas before Alison Duncan became the chief of staff?
I don't recall.
Once she became the chief of staff, is she the person who gave you assignments most often and to whom you reported most often?
That's right. Occasionally at the staff meeting, assignments would be given out. But that was held only one day of the week. So during the rest of the week, when things came up, Alison was in charge of giving out assignments.
Now, did the judge's chief of staff report directly to him, or did she have an intermediate supervisor?
No, she reported directly to him, as I understand.
Who prepared your performance evaluations?
I understood that Judge Thomas prepared the performance evaluations.
Did the chief of staff, to the best of your knowledge, have the power to fire you?
Not to my knowledge.
Who had that power?
Judge Thomas.
Was there anyone else at EEOC that you believe possessed that power?
No, not for that office.
Was Judge Thomas then still your ultimate boss and the boss of the entire office then?
Yes.
Now, was there any routine workday at EEOC that you could describe for the committee?
Actually, most of the work that we did, unlike at education, most of the work was responding to internal memos instead of responding to things that had come from outside. There were many more of those because there were many more offices. And so each of us who were responsible for a certain area would respond to a memo or write up a memo to be sent to the chairman for his response. We also had hearings, and there was always a special assistant who was assigned to sit in the commission hearings. And so on some days, if we were having hearings, well, one of the special assistants, very often it was me, would sit in the hearing to provide the chairman with information. On the weeks or during the days of the week that we weren't having hearings, we had to prepare the chairman for the hearings themselves, so that we had to go through the files on the hearings and the records and brief the chairman on those, or write memos of brief to the chairman on them.
Professor, you've testified that you had regular contact with Judge Thomas at the Department of Education, and you've just described the extent of your contact with Judge Thomas at EEOC. And you've described your professional interaction with him. Now, I must ask you now to describe once again and more fully the behavior that you have alleged he engaged in while your boss, which you say went beyond the professional conventions and were unwelcome to you. Now, I know these are difficult to discuss, but you must understand that we have to ask you about them. Professor, did some of the attempts at conversation that you have described in your opening statement occur in your office or in his office?
Some occurred in his office. Some comments were made in mine. Most often they were in his office.
Did all of the behavior that you have described to us in your written statement to the committee and your oral statement now and what you have said to the FBI, did all of that behavior take place at work?
Yes, it did.
Now, I'd like you to go back.
Let me clarify that. If you're including a luncheon during the work day to be at work, yes.
Well, I'm just trying to determine, it was in what you could describe and you believe to be part of the work day.
Yes.
Now, I have to ask you, where did each of these events occur? If you can, to the best of your ability, I'd like you to recount for us where each of the allegations that you have mentioned in your opening statement, each of the incidences occurred, physically where they occurred.
Well, I remember 2 occasions these incidents occurred at lunch.
Do you remember which of those incidences were at lunch, Judge? Professor? Well, let me ask this as an antecedent question. Were you always alone when the alleged conversations would begin, or the alleged statements by Judge Thomas would begin?
Well, and when the incidents occurred in the cafeterias, we were not alone. There were other people in the cafeterias because of the way the tables were set, or there were few individuals who were in the immediate area of the conversation.
Those incidences that occurred other than in the cafeteria, those incidences occurred in his office. Can you tell me what incidences occurred, of the ones you've described to us, occurred in his office?
Well, I recall specifically that the incident about the Coke can occurred in his office at the EEOC.
And what was that incident again?
The incident with regard to the Coke can that's spelled out in my statement.
Once again for me, please.
The incident involved his going to his desk, getting up from a work table, going to his desk, looking at this can and saying, "Who put pubic hair on my Coke?"
Was anyone else in his office at the time?
No.
Was the door closed?
I don't recall.
Are there any other incidences that occurred in his office in his office period?
There is, I recall at least one instance in his office at the EEOC where he discussed some pornographic material, or he brought up the substance or the content of pornographic material.
Again, it's difficult, but for the record, what substance did he bring up in this instance at EEOC in his office? What was the content of what he said?
Well, this was a reference to an individual who had a very large penis, and he used the name that he had been referred to in the pornographic material.
Do you recall what it was?
Yes, I do. The name that was referred to was Long Dong Silver.
Were you working on any matter in that context, or you just were called into the office? Do you remember what the circumstance of you being in an office on that occasion?
Very often, I went in to report on memos that I had written. I'm sure that that's why I was in the office. What happened generally was that I would write a note to Clarence Thomas, and he would call me in to talk about what I had written to him. And I believe that's what happened on that occasion.
Let's go back to the first time that you alleged Judge Thomas indicated he had more than a professional interest in you. Do you recall what the first time was, and with as much precision as you can, what he said to you?
As I recall, it either happened at lunch or it happened in his office when he said to me very casually, "You ought to go out with me sometime."
You ought to, or you are to?
You ought to.
Was that the extent at that incident?
That was the extent at that incident. At that incident, I declined. And at that incident, I think he may have said something about, you know, he couldn't understand why I wouldn't want to go out with him, and the conversation may have ended.
Can you describe for the committee how you felt at that time when he asked you out? What was your reaction?
Well, my reaction at that time was a little surprised, because I had not indicated to him in any way that I knew that I was interested in dating him. We had developed a good working relationship. It was cordial and it was very comfortable. So I was surprised that he was interested in something else.
With regard to the other incidences, and my time is running down, and I will come back to them, but With regard to the other incidences that you have mentioned in your opening statement, can you tell us how you felt at the time? Were you uncomfortable? Were you embarrassed? Did it not concern you? How did you feel about it?
The pressure to go out with him, I felt embarrassed about, because I had given him an explanation that I thought it was not good for me as an employee working directly for him to go out. I thought he didn't take seriously my decision to say no, and that he did not respect my having said no to him. The conversations about sex, I was much more embarrassed and humiliated by. The two combined really made me feel sort of helpless in a job situation, because I really wanted to do the work that I was doing. I enjoyed that work. But I felt that that was being put in jeopardy by the other things that were going on in the office. And so I was really, really very troubled by it and distressed over it.
Can you tell the committee what was the most embarrassing of all the incidences that you have alleged?
I think the one that was the most embarrassing was his discussion of pornography involving these women with large breasts and engaged in variety of sex with different people or animals. That was the thing that embarrassed me the most and made me feel the most humiliated.
If you can, in his words, not yours, in his words, can you tell us what on that occasion he said to you? You have described the essence of the conversation. In order for us to determine, well, can you tell us in his words what he said?
I really cannot quote him verbatim. I can remember something like, you really ought to see these films that I've seen, or this material that I've seen. This woman has this kind of breast, or a breast that measure this size, and they've got her in there with all kinds of things. She's doing all kinds of different sex acts, and you know, that kind of, those were the kinds of words where he expressed his enjoyment of it and seemed to try to encourage me to enjoy that kind of material as well.
Did he indicate why he thought you should see this material?
No.
Why do you think? What was your reaction? Why did you think he was saying these things to you?
Well, coupled with the pressure about going out with him, I felt that implicit in this discussion about sex was the offer to have sex with him, not just to go out with him. There was never any explicit thing about going out to dinner or going to a particular concert or movie. It was, we ought to go out. And given his other conversations, I took that to mean we ought to have sex, or we ought to look at these pornographic movies together.
Professor, at your press conference, one of your press conferences, you said that the issues that you raised about Judge Thomas, you referred to it as an ugly issue. Is that how you view these conversations?
Yes, they were very ugly. They were very dirty. They were disgusting.
Were any one of these conversations this will be my last question. My time is up. Were any one of these conversations, other than being asked to go out, were any one of them repeated more than once? The same conversation, reference to?
The reference to his own physical attributes was repeated more than once, yes.
Now again, for the record, did he just say, I have great physical capability and attributes, or was he more graphic?
He was much more graphic.
Can you tell us what he said?
Well, I can tell you that he compared his penis size. He measured his penis in terms of length, those kinds of comments.
Thank you. My time is up under our agreement. By the way, I might state for the agreement, once again, we've agreed that we will go back and forth a half-hour of conversation on each side, at which time, when the principals finish asking questions, that members who have not been designated to ask questions, since all have been keenly involved and interested in this on both sides, will have an opportunity to ask questions for 5 minutes. But let me now yield to my friend from Pennsylvania, Senator Specter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Professor Hill, I have been asked to question you by Senator Thurmond, the ranking Republican, but I do not regard this as an adversary proceeding.
Thank you.
And my duties run to the people of Pennsylvania who have elected me, and in the broader sense as a United States Senator, to constitutional government and the Constitution. And my purpose, as the purpose of the hearing generally, is to find out what happened.
Certainly.
We obviously have a matter of enormous importance from a lot of points of view. The integrity of the court, that is very important, that the Supreme Court not have any member who is tainted or not have a cloud. And in our society, we can accept unfavorable decisions from the court if we think they're fairly arrived at.
Senator, excuse me for interrupting, but some of our colleagues on this end can't hear you. Can you pull that closer? I know it makes it
I had done that carefully, Chairman, to avoid that.
Well, you're succeeded, Senator.
You can hear me all right, can't you, Professor Hill?
Yes, I can.
Okay. But I was just saying about the importance of the court, where there should be a feeling of confidence in the fairness of decisions, because parties can take unfavorable decisions if they think they're being treated fairly. Sure. I think this hearing is very important to the Senate and to this committee, because by 2020 hindsight, we should have done this before. And obviously, it's of critical importance to Judge Thomas and you, whose reputations and careers are on the line. It's not easy to go back to events which happened almost a decade ago to find out what happened. Very, very difficult to do. I would start, Professor Hill, with one of your more recent statements, at least according to a man by the name of Carlton Stewart, who says that he met you in August of this year, ran into you at the American Bar Association convention in Atlanta, where Professor Hill stated to me in the presence of Stanley Grayson, quote, how great Clarence's nomination was and how much he deserved it, unquote. We went on to discuss Judge Thomas and our tenure at EEOC. For an additional 30 minutes or so, there was no mention of sexual harassment or anything negative about Judge Thomas stated during that conversation, and there's a statement from Stanley Grayson corroborating what Carlton Stewart has said. My question is, did Mr. Stewart accurately state what happened with you at that meeting?
As I recall at that meeting, I did see Carlton Stewart, and we did discuss the nomination. Carlton Stewart was very excited about the nomination and said, I believe that those are his words, how great it was that Clarence Thomas had been nominated. I only said that it was a great opportunity for Clarence Thomas. I did not say that it was a good thing, that this nomination was a good thing. I might add that I have spoken with newspaper reporters and have gone on record as saying that I have some doubts and some questions about the nomination. However, in that conversation where I was faced with an individual who was elated about the probabilities of his friend being on the Supreme Court, I did not want to insult him or argue with him at that time about the issue. So I was very passive in the conversation.
Excuse me?
I was very passive in the conversation.
So that Mr. Stewart and Mr. Grayson are simply wrong when they say, and this is a quotation from Mr. Stewart, that you said specifically how great his nomination was and how much he deserved it. They're just wrong.
The latter part is certainly wrong. I did say that it is a great opportunity for Clarence Thomas. I did not say that he deserved it.
We have a statement from former Dean of Oral Roberts Law School, Roger Tuttle, who quotes you as saying that laudatory comments about Judge Thomas as a fine man and an excellent legal scholar, and in the course of 3 years when Dean Tuttle knew you at the law school, that you had always praised him and had never made any derogatory comments. Is Dean Tuttle correct?
During the time that I was at Oral Roberts University, I realized that Charles Cothe, who was the founding dean of that school, had very high regards for Clarence Thomas. I did not risk talking in disparaging ways about Clarence Thomas at that time. I don't recall any specific conversations about Clarence Thomas in which I said anything about his legal scholarship. I don't really know of his legal scholarship, certainly at that time.
Well, I can understand it if you didn't say anything, but Dean Tuttle makes a specific statement. His words are that you said, quote, the most laudatory comments, unquote.
I have no response to that because I don't know exactly what he is saying.
There is a question about Phyllis Berry, who was quoted in the New York Times on October 7th, quote, in an interview, Ms. Berry suggested that the allegations, referring to your allegations, were a result of Ms. Hill's disappointment and frustration that Mr. Thomas did not show any sexual interest in her, close quote. You were asked about Ms. Berry at the interview on October 9th, and are reported to have said, well, I don't know Phyllis Berry, and she doesn't know me, and there are quite a few people who have come forward to say that they saw you and Ms. Berry together and that you knew each other very well.
I would disagree with that. Ms. Berry worked at the EEOC. She did attend some staff meetings at the EEOC. We were not close friends. We did not socialize together. And she has no basis for making a comment about my social interest with regard to Clarence Thomas or anyone else. I might add that at the time that I had had an active social life and that I was involved with other people.
Did Ms. Anna Jenkins and Ms. J.C. Alvarez, who both have provided statements attesting to the relationship between you and Miss Berry, a friendly one where Miss Berry would have known you. Were both Ms. Jenkins and Ms. Alvarez co-workers in a position to observe your relationship with Ms. Berry?
They were both workers at the EEOC, and I can only say that they were commenting on our relationship in the office. It was cordial and friendly. We were not unfriendly with each other, but we were not social acquaintances. We were professional acquaintances.
So that when you said Miss Berry doesn't know me and I don't know her, you weren't referring to just that, but some intensity of knowledge?
Well, this is a specific remark about my sexual interest, and I think one has to know another person very well to make those kinds of remarks unless they are very openly expressed.
Well, did Miss Berry observe you and Judge Thomas together in the EEOC office?
Yes, at staff meetings where she attended, and at the office, yes.
Let me pick up on Senator Biden's line of questioning. You referred to the, quote, oddest episode I remember, and then talked about the Coke incident. When you made your statement to the FBI, why was it that that was omitted if it was so strong in your mind and such an odd incident?
I spoke to the FBI agent and I told them the nature of the comments and did not tell them more specifics. I referred to the specific comments that were in my statement.
Well, when you talked to the FBI agents, you did make specific allegations about specific sexual statements made by Judge Thomas.
Yes.
So that your statement to the FBI did have specifics, and my question to you, why, if this was such an odd episode, wasn't it included when you talked to the FBI?
I don't know.
I'd like you to take a look, if you would, at your own statement in the first full paragraph of page 5 on the last line and ask you why that was not included in your statement to the FBI.
Excuse me, my copy is not this. Does not have. Would you refer to that passage again?
Yes, of course. Referring to page 5 of the statement which you provided to the committee, there's a strong allegation in the last sentence, and my question to you is, why didn't you tell that to the FBI?
When the FBI investigation took place, I tried to answer their questions as directly as I recall. I was very uncomfortable talking to the agent about these instances. I am very uncomfortable now, but I feel that it is necessary. The FBI agent told me that it was regular procedure to come back and ask for more specifics if it was necessary. And so at that time, I did not provide all of the specifics that I could have.
Professor Hill, I can understand that it's uncomfortable, and I don't want to add to that. And if any of it is something you want to pause about, please do. You testified this morning in response to Senator Biden that the most embarrassing question involved this is not too bad, women's large breasts, that's a word we use all the time. That was the most embarrassing aspect of what Judge Thomas had said to you.
No, the most embarrassing aspect was his description of the acts of these individuals, these women, the acts that those particular people would engage in. It wasn't just the breast, it was the continuation of his story about what happened in those films with the people with this characteristic, physical characteristic.
With the physical characteristic of?
The large breast.
Well, in your statement to the FBI, you did refer to the films, but there's no reference to the physical characteristic you described. I don't want to attach too much weight to it, but I had thought you said that the aspect of the large breasts was the aspect that concerned you, and that was missing from the statement to the FBI.
Then I have been misunderstood. It wasn't the physical characteristic of having large breasts. It was the description of the acts that this person with this characteristic would do, the acts that they would engage in, group acts, acts with animals, things of that nature involving women.
Professor Hill, I'd like you now to turn to page 3 of your statement that you submitted to the committee we got just this morning. And the last sentence on the first full paragraph, you again make on that statement a very serious allegation as to Judge Thomas, and I would ask you why you didn't tell the FBI about that when they interviewed you.
I suppose my response would be the same. I did not tell the FBI all of the information. The FBI agent made clear that if I were embarrassed about talking about something, that I could decline to discuss things that were too embarrassing, but that I could provide as much information as I felt comfortable with at that time.
Well, now, did you decline to discuss with the FBI anything on the grounds that it was too embarrassing?
There were no particular questions that were asked. He asked me to describe the kinds of incidents that had occurred as graphically as I could without being embarrassed. I did not explain everything. I agree that all of this was not disclosed in the FBI investigation.
Was it easier for you because one of the FBI agents was a woman, or did you ask at any time that you give the statements to her alone in the absence of the man FBI agent?
No, I did not do that. I didn't ask to disclose. I did not.
Well, I understand from what you're saying now that you were told that you didn't have to say anything because if it was too embarrassing for you. But my question to you is, did you use that at any point to decline to give any information on the ground that it was too embarrassing?
I never declined to answer a question because it was too embarrassing. No, he asked me to describe the incidents. And rather than decline to make any statement at all, I described them to my level of comfort.
Well, you described a fair number of things in the FBI statement, but I come back now to the last sentence on page 3, the first full paragraph, because it's a strong allegation. And now you have said that you had not omitted that because of its being embarrassing, or you might have said even something embarrassing to the female agent. And my question to you is why was that omitted?
Senator, at the time of the FBI investigation, I cooperated as fully as I could at that time. And I cannot explain why anything in specific was not stated.
Professor Hill, you testified that you drew an inference that Judge Thomas might want you to look at pornographic films, but you told the FBI specifically that he never asked you to watch the films. Is that correct?
He never said, let's go to my apartment and watch films, or go to my house and watch films. He did say, you ought to see this material.
But when you testified that, as I wrote it down, quote, we ought to look at pornographic movies together, that was an expression of what was in your mind.
That was the inference that I drew, yes.
The inference
with his pressing me for social engagements, yes.
That something he might have wanted you to do, but the fact is, flatly, he never asked you to look at pornographic movies with him.
With him? No, he did not.
Clarification. I don't want to.
I'd rather not.
No, to determine whether or not the witness ever saw the FBI report. Does she know what was stated by the FBI about her conversation?
Well, Mr. Chairman, I'm asking her about what she said to the FBI.
I understand. I'm just asking it. Have you ever seen the FBI report?
No, I have not.
Thank you.
Would you like to take a few moments and look at it now?
Yes, I would.
Okay. Let's make a copy of the FBI report.
I think we have to be careful to make sure the FBI report only as it pertains. Maybe you could continue only as it pertains to her. We're not at liberty to give to her what the FBI said about other individuals.
I was asking you, Professor Hill, about the FBI report, obviously because the portion I'm questioning you about relates to their recording what you said, and I think it's fair, one lawyer to another.
No, I would continue
to ask
because you are not asking her directly. I just wanted to know whether or not her responses were at all based upon her knowledge of what the FBI said she said. That's all I was asking.
Well, she's asked to see it, and I think it's a fair request, and I would be glad to take a moment's delay to
This is the
have her look
FBI
at it.
report as it references Professor Hill, only Professor Hill.
May we stop the clock, Mr.
Yes,
Chairman?
we will. We'll turn the clock back and give the senator additional times. I will not ask how long to turn it back. I'll leave that decision to Senator Simpson. Senator Simpson.
I'll be watching the clock. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
The clock. No, but okay. Make sure it's 10 minutes. Just a minute. There you go. Okay. That was not to hurry you along, Professor. That was to ask for silence in the room. The only point I wish to make is that you know what's in the report and understand the report is a summary of your conversation, not a transcription of your conversation. While we have this momentary break, the Senator has 10 or more minutes remaining, and at the conclusion of his questioning, we'll recess for lunch for an hour and then begin with Senator Leahy. Whatever, an hour from the time
I see. I'm sorry, I didn't hear that part. Thank you.
All right. Have you had a chance to peruse it?
Yes.
Thank you. Now,
Thank you.
I apologize to my colleague for the interruption.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Professor Hill, now that you have read the FBI report, you can see that it contains no reference to any mention of Judge Thomas's private parts or sexual prowess or size, etc. And my question to you would be on something that is as important as it is in your written testimony and in your responses to Senator Biden, why didn't you tell the FBI about that?
Senator, in paragraph 2 on page 2 of the report, it says that he liked to discuss specific sex acts and frequency of sex. And I'm not sure what all that summarizes, but his sexual prowess, his sexual preferences could have.
Which line are you referring to, Professor?
The very last line in paragraph 2 of page 2.
Well, that says, quote, this is not too bad, I can read it. Thomas liked to discuss specific sex acts and frequency of sex, close quote. Now, are you saying, in response to my question as to why you didn't tell the FBI about the size of his private parts and his sexual prowess and Long John Silver, that information was comprehended within the statement, quote, Thomas liked to discuss specific sex acts and frequency of sex?
I am not saying that information was included in that. I don't know that it was. I don't believe that I even mentioned the latter information to the FBI agent. And I could only respond again that at the time of the investigation, I tried to cooperate as fully as I could to recall information to answer the questions that they asked.
Professor Hill, you said that you took it to mean that Judge Thomas wanted to have sex with you, but in fact, he never did ask you to have sex, correct?
No, he did not ask me to have sex. He did continually pressure me to go out with him, continually, and he would not accept my explanation as one as being valid.
So that when you said you took it to mean we ought to have sex, that was an inference that you drew?
Yes.
Professor Hill, the USA Today reported on October 9th, quote, Anita Hill was told by Senate staffers she signed affidavit alleging sexual harassment by Clarence Thomas. Anita Hill was told by Senate staffers her signed affidavit alleging sexual harassment by Clarence Thomas would be the instrument that, quote, quietly and behind the scenes, close quote, would force him to withdraw his name. Was USA Today correct on that, attributing it to a man named Mr. Keith Henderson, a 10-year friend of Hill and former Senate Judiciary Committee staffer?
I do not recall. I guess, did I say that?
Well,
I don't understand who said what.
Let me go on. He said Keith Henderson, a 10-year friend of Hill and former Senate Judiciary Committee staffer, says Hill was advised by senator staffers that her charge would be kept secret and her name kept from public scrutiny. Quote, they would, apparently referring again to Mr. Henderson's statement, quote, they would approach Judge Thomas with the information and he would withdraw and not turn this into a big story, close quote, Henderson says. Did anybody ever tell you that by providing the statement that there would be a move to press Judge Thomas to withdraw his nomination?
I don't recall any story about using this to press anyone.
Well, do you recall anything at all about anything related to that?
I think that I was told that my statement would be shown to Judge Thomas, and I agreed to that.
But was there any suggestion, however slight, that the statement with these serious charges would result in a withdrawal so that it wouldn't have to be necessary for your identity to be known or for you to come forward under circumstances like these?
There was no, not that I recall. I don't recall anything being said about him being pressed to resign.
Well, this would only have happened in the course of the past month or so, because all this started just in early September.
I understand.
So that when you say you don't recall, I would ask you to search your memory on this point, and perhaps we might begin, and this is an important subject, about the initiation of this entire matter.
Surely.
With respect to the Senate staffers who talked to you. But that's going to be too long for the few minutes that I have left, so I would just ask you once again, when you say you don't recollect whether there was anything at all said to you by anyone that, as USA Today reports, that just by having the allegations of sexual harassment by Clarence Thomas, that it would be the instrument that, quote, quietly and behind the scenes, close quote, would force him to withdraw his name. Anything related to that in any way whatsoever?
The only thing that I can think of, and if you'll check, there were a lot of phone conversations. We were discussing this matter over very carefully. And at some point there might have been a conversation about what might happen. But there might have been, but it wasn't, I don't remember this specific kind of comment about quietly and behind the scenes pressing him to withdraw.
Well, aside from quietly and behind the scenes pressing him to withdraw, any suggestion that just the charges themselves in writing would result in Judge Thomas withdrawing, going away?
No, no. I don't recall that at all, no.
Well, you started to say that there might have been some conversation, and
there might have been some conversation about what could possibly occur.
Well, tell me about that conversation.
Well, I can't really tell you any more than what I've said. I discussed what the alternatives were, what might happen with this affidavit that I submitted. We talked about possibility of the Senate committee coming back for more information. We talked about the possibility of the FBI going through the FBI and getting more information. Some questions from individual senators. The statement that you're referring to, I really can't verify.
Well, when you talk about the Senate coming back for more information, or the FBI coming back for more information, or senators coming back for more information, that has nothing to do at all with Judge Thomas withdrawing. So that when you testified a few moments ago that there might possibly have been a conversation in response to my question about a possible withdrawal, I would press you on that, Professor Hill, in this context. You've testified with some specificity about what happened 10 years ago. I would ask you to press your recollection as to what happened within the last month.
And I have done that, Senator. and I don't recall that comment. I do recall that there might have been some suggestion that if the FBI did the investigation, that the Senate might get involved, that there may be, that a number of things might occur, but I have to be honest with you. I cannot verify the statement that you're asking me to verify. There is not really more that I can tell you on that.
Well, when you say a number of things might occur, what sort of things?
May I just add this one thing?
Sure.
The nature of that kind of conversation that you're talking about is very different from the nature of the conversation that I recall. The conversations that I recall were much more vivid, they were more explicit. The conversations that I have had with the staff over the last few days in particular have become much more blurry. But these are vivid events that I recall from even 8 years ago when they happened. And they are going to stand out much more in my mind than a telephone conversation. They were one-on-one personal conversations, as a matter of fact, and that adds to why they are much more easily recalled. I am sure that there are some comments that I do not recall the exact nature of from that period as well, but these that are here are the ones that I do recall.
Well, Professor Hill, I can understand why you say that these comments, alleged comments, would stand out in your mind, and we've gone over those. I don't want to go over them again. But when you talk about the withdrawal of a Supreme Court nominee, talking about something that is very, very vivid, stark, and you're talking about something that occurred within the past 4 or 5 weeks. And my question goes to a very dramatic and important event. If a mere allegation would pressure a nominee to withdraw from the Supreme Court, I would suggest to you that that's not something that wouldn't stick in a mind for 4 or 5 weeks, if it happened.
Well, Senator, I would suggest to you that for me, these are more than mere allegations, so that if that comment were made, these are the truth to me. These comments are the truth to me. And if it were made, then I may not respond to it in the same way that you do.
Well, I'm not questioning your statement when I use the word allegation to refer to 10 years ago. I just don't want to talk about it as a fact, because so far that's something we have to decide. So I'm not stressing that aspect of the question. I do with respect to the time period. But the point that I would come back to for just one more minute would be, well, let me ask it to you this way. Would you not consider it a matter of real importance if someone said to you, Professor, you won't have to go public, your name won't have to be disclosed, you won't have to do anything, just sign the affidavit, and this man, as the USA Today report, would be the instrument that, quote, quietly and behind the scenes, close quote, would force him to withdraw his name. Now, I'm not asking you whether it happened. I'm asking you now only if it did happen, whether that would be the kind of a statement to you which would be important and impressed upon you that you would remember in the course of 4 or 5 weeks.
I'm not sure what he said. I don't recall a specific statement, and I cannot say whether that comment would have stuck in my mind. I really cannot say that.
The sequence with the staffers is very involved, so I'm going to move to another subject now, but I want to come back to this. And over the luncheon break, I would ask you to think about it further, if there's any way you can shed any further light on that question, because I think it's an important one.
Thank you.
Professor Hill, the next subject I want to take up with you involves the kind of strong language which you say Judge Thomas used in a very unique setting where there you have the chairman of the EEOC, the nation's chief law enforcement officer on sexual harassment. And here you have a lawyer who's an expert in this field, later goes on to teach civil rights, and has a dedication to making sure that women are not discriminated against. And if you take the single issue of discrimination against women, the chairman of the EEOC has a more important role on that question even than a Supreme Court justice. Supreme Court justice is a more important position overall, but if you focus just on sexual harassment, and the testimony that you have described here today depicts a circumstance where the chairman of the EEOC is blatant, as you describe it. And my question is, understanding the fact that you're 25 and that you're shortly out of law school and the pressures that exist in this world, and I know about it to a fair extent. I used to be a district attorney, and I know about sexual harassment and discrimination against women, and I think I have some sensitivity on it. But even considering all of that, given your own expert standing and the fact that here you have the chief law enforcement officer of the country on this subject, and the whole purpose of the civil rights law is being perverted right in the office of the chairman with one of his own female subordinates, what went through your mind, if anything, on whether you ought to come forward at that stage? Because if you had, you'd stop this man from being head of EEOC perhaps for another decade. What went on through your mind? I know you decided not to make a complaint, but did you give that any consideration? And if so, how could you allow this kind of reprehensible conduct to go on right in the headquarters without doing something about it?
Well, it was a very trying and difficult decision for me not to say anything further. I can only say that when I made the decision to just withdraw from the situation and not press a claim or charge against him, that I may have shirked a duty, a responsibility that I had. And to that extent, I confess that I am very sorry that I did not do something or say something. But at the time, that was my best judgment. Maybe it was a poor judgment, but it wasn't a dishonest and it wasn't a completely unreasonable choice that I made, given the circumstances.
My red light is on. Thank you very much, Professor Hill. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you, Professor Hill. We'll adjourn until 2:15. Reconvene at 2:15.
Next, more from that 1991 hearing with Clarence Thomas, taking questions from lawmakers. This portion is just over an hour.
Committee will please come to order. Judge, it's a tough day and tough night for you, I know. Let me ask, do you have anything you'd like to say before we begin? I understand that your preference is, which is totally and completely understandable, that we go 1 hour tonight, 30 minutes on each side. Am I correct in that?
That's right.
you have anything you'd like to say?
Senator, I would like to start by saying unequivocally, uncategorically, that I deny each and every single allegation against me today that suggested in any way that I had conversations of a sexual nature or about pornographic material with Anita Hill, that I ever attempted to date her, that I ever had any personal sexual interest in her, or that I in any way ever harassed her. A second, and I think more important point, I think that this today is a travesty. I think that it is disgusting. I think that this hearing should never occur in America. This is a case in which this sleaze, this dirt, was searched for by staffers of members of this committee, was then leaked to the media, and this committee and this body validated it and displayed it at prime time over our entire nation. How would any member on this committee, any person in this room, or any person in this country would like sleaze said about him or her in this fashion, or this dirt dredged up, and this gossip and these lies displayed in this manner? How would any person like it? The Supreme Court is not worth it. No job is worth it. I'm not here for that. I'm here for my name, my family, my life, and my integrity. I think something is dreadfully wrong with this country when any person in this free country would be subjected to this. This is not a closed room. There was an FBI investigation. This is not an opportunity to talk about difficult matters privately or in a closed environment. This is a circus. It's a national disgrace. And from my standpoint, as a black American, as far as I'm concerned, it is a high-tech lynching for uppity blacks who in any way deign to think for themselves, to do for themselves, to have different ideas. And it is a message that unless you kowtow to an old order, this is what will happen to you. You will be lynched, destroyed, caricatured by a committee of the U.S. Senate rather than hung from a tree.
We will have, yes, would you like to say that?
Mr. Chairman,
Senator from South Carolina.
I have named Senator Hatch to cross-examine the judge and then those who are supporting him. So Senator Hatch, if you now take over.
As I understand it, it was, you don't go to...
That's correct. I think we would start with Senator Heflin and then go to Senator Hatch.
Sure,
That's appropriate.
sure, I think that's the way I was... I'd be happy to do it, but I think that's the way I was told.
Senator Heflin.
Judge Thomas, in addition to Anita Hill, there have surfaced some other allegations against you. One was on a television show last evening here in Washington, Channel 7. I don't know whether you saw that or not. You didn't see it. It was carried somewhat in the media, print media today, but it involved a man by the name of Earl Harper, Jr., who allegedly was a senior trial lawyer with the EEOC at Baltimore in and around the early 80s. Do you recall this instance pertaining to Earl Harper, Jr.?
I remember the name. I can't remember the details.
The allegations against Mr. Harper involved some 12 or 13 women who claimed that Mr. Harper made unwelcome sexual advances to several women on his staff, including instances in which Mr. Harper masturbated in the presence of some of the female employees. The allegations contain other aspects of sexual activity. The information you have is that the General Counsel of the EEOC, David Slate, made a lengthy internal investigation and found that this had the effect of creating an intimidating, hostile, and offensive working environment, and that on November the 23rd, 1983, you wrote Mr. Slate a memo urging that Mr. Harper be fired. Mr. Slate eventually recommended dismissal. Then the story recites that you did not dismiss him, that you allowed him to stay on for 11 months, and then he retired. Does that bring back to you any recollection of that event concerning Mr. Earl Harper, Jr.?
Again, I'm operating strictly on recollection. If I remember the case, if it's the one I'm thinking of, Mr. Harper's supervisor recommended either suspension or some form of sanction or punishment that was less than termination. When that proposal, his supervisor initially was not David Slate, when that proposal reached my desk, I believe my recommendation was that for the conduct involved, he should be fired. The problem there was that if the immediate supervisor's decision is changed, and I believe Mr. Harper was a veteran, there are a number of procedural protections that he had, including a hearing, and of course he had a lawyer, and there was potential litigation, et cetera. I don't remember all of the details, but it's not as simple as you set it out. It was as a result of my insistence that the General Counsel, as I remember, upgraded the sanction to termination.
Do you know a congressman by the name of Scott Klug, a Republican congressman who was defeated Robert Kastenmeier from Wisconsin, who now serves in Congress, who back in the early 80s, 83 or something, was a television reporter for a channel here in Washington, and that he, at that time, disclosed this as being indicating that after the recommendation of dismissal, that you did not move in regards to it for some 11 months and let him retire. Do you know Congressman Klug?
I do not know him. Again, I remember I'm operating on recollection. There was far more to it than the facts as you set them out. His rights had much to do with the fact that he was a veteran and that we could not simply dismiss him. If we could, that was my recommendation, he would have been dismissed.
There was no political influence brought to bear on you at that time to prevent his dismissal. Do you recall if any political influence?
Absolutely no political influence. In fact, it was my policy that no personnel decisions would in any way be changed or influenced by political pressure, one way or the other.
Now, it's reported to me that Congressman Klug, after your nomination, went to the White House and told this story, and that I hear by hearsay that the White House ignored his statement, that Congressman Klug further came to the Senate Judiciary Committee and made it known here, and that as far as I know, I attempted to check, I hadn't been able to find where it was in the Judiciary Committee, if it was, and I think the chairman has attempted to locate. But the point I'm asking is, in your process pertaining to the nomination and the preparation for it, were you ever notified that Congressman Klug went to the White House in regards to this?
I don't remember that, Senator.
Nobody ever discussed that with
No.
you? Well, that's the way it's been reported to me, and it's very fragmented and relative to it. But I have asked that all the records of the EEOC be subpoenaed by subpoena ducis tecum pertaining to that, in order that we might get to the bottom of it.
Mr. Chairman, if I can interrupt Senator Heflin, I really think this is outside the scope under the rules. I would have to object.
I would have to sustain that objection. I do not.
I hesitate to object, but I just think you keep it on the subject matter.
I do not see where it's relevant.
Well, I think it is relevant in the issue pertaining to period of time relative to the issue, and particularly in regards to the responsibilities as head of an agency dealing with discrimination in employment.
If I may say, let me speak. If I may say, this is not about whether or not the judge administered properly or improperly the agency. Yeah. The only issue here relates to conduct and the allegations that have been made. So I would respectfully suggest to my friend from Alabama that line of question is not in order, and I rule it out of order.
All right, sir. I'll reserve an exception, as we used to say. Now, you, I suppose, have heard Professor Hill, Ms. Hill, Anita F. Hill, testify today.
No, I haven't.
You didn't listen?
No, I didn't. I've heard enough lies.
You didn't listen to her testimony?
No,
at all?
I didn't.
on television?
No, I didn't. I've heard enough lies. The day is not a day that, in my opinion, is high among the days in our country. This is a travesty. You've spent the entire day destroying what it has taken me 43 years to build and providing a forum for that.
Well, Judge Thomas, you know, we have a responsibility too. And as far as I'm involved, I had nothing to do with Anita Hill coming here and testifying. We're trying to get to the bottom of this, and if she is lying, then I think you can help us prove that she was lying.
Senator, I am incapable of proving the negative. It did not occur.
Well, if it did not occur, I think you are in a position with certainly your ability to testify to, in effect, to try to eliminate it from people's minds.
Senator, I didn't create it in people's minds. This matter was investigated by the Federal Bureau of Investigation in a confidential way. It was then leaked last weekend to the media. I did not do that. And how many members of this committee would like to have the same scurrilous, uncorroborated allegations made about him and then leaked to national newspapers and then be drawn and dragged before a national forum of this nature to discuss those allegations that should have been resolved in a confidential way?
Well, I certainly appreciate your attitude towards leaks. I happen to serve on the Senate Ethics Committee, and it's been a sieve.
Well, but it didn't leak on me. This leaked on me, and it is drowning my life, my career, and my integrity. And you can't give it back to me, and this committee can't give it back to me, and this Senate can't give it back to me. You have robbed me of something that can never be restored.
I know exactly how you feel.
Judge Thomas, one of the aspects of this is that she could be living in a fantasy world. I don't know. We're just trying to get to the bottom of all of these facts. But if you didn't and didn't testify, I think you put yourself in an unusual position. In effect, defending yourself. And basically, some of us want to be fair to you, fair to her. But if you didn't listen to what she said today, then that puts it somewhat in a more difficult task to find out what the actual facts are relative to this matter.
The facts keep changing, Senator. When the FBI visited me, the statements to this committee and the questions were one thing. The FBI's subsequent questions were another thing. And the statements today, as I received summaries of them, were another thing. It is not my fault that the facts change. What I have said to you is categorical, that any allegations that I engage in any conduct involving sexual activity, pornographic movies, attempted to date her, any allegations, I deny. It is not true. So the facts can change, but my denial does not. Mr. Hill was treated in a way that all my special assistants were treated: cordial, professional, respectful.
Judge, if you're on the bench and you approach a case where you appear to have a closed mind and that you are only right, doesn't it raise issues of judicial temperament?
Senator, there is a big difference between approaching a case objectively and watching yourself being lynched. There is no comparison whatsoever.
All right.
He has personal knowledge of this as well, and personal justification for anger.
Judge, I don't want to go over this stuff, but of course there are many instances in which she has stated, but and in effect, since you didn't see her testify, I think it's somewhat unfair to ask you specifically about it. I would reserve my time and go ahead and let Senator Hatch ask you and then come back.
Senator Hatch.
Okay. Judge Thomas, I've sat here and I've listened all day long. And Anita Hill was very impressive. She's an impressive law professor. She's a Yale Law graduate. And when she met with the FBI, she said that you told her about your sexual experiences and preferences. And I hate to go into this, but I want to go into it because I have to. And I know it's something that you wish you'd never heard at any time or place. But I think it's important that we go into it. And let me just do it this way. She said to the FBI that you told her about your sexual experiences and preferences, that you asked her what she liked, or if she had ever done the same thing, that you discussed oral sex between men and women, that you discussed viewing films of people having sex with each other and with animals, and that you told her that she should see such films, and that you like to discuss specific sex acts and the frequency of sex. What about that?
Senator, I would not want to accept being required to here to dignify those allegations with a response. As I've said before, I categorically deny them. To me, I have been pilloried with scurrilous allegations of this nature. I have denied them earlier, and I deny them tonight.
Judge Thomas, today, in a new statement, in addition to what she told the FBI, which I have to agree with you is quite a bit, she made a number of other allegations. And what I'd like to do is, some of them most specific were for the first time today in addition to these, which I think almost anybody would say are terrible. Now, I'd just like to give you an opportunity, because this is your chance to address her testimony. At any time, did you say to Professor Hill that she could ruin your career if she talked about sexual comments you allegedly made to her?
No.
Did you say to her in words or substance that you could ruin her career?
No.
Should she ever have been afraid of you? and any kind of vindictiveness to ruin her career?
Senator, I have made it my business to help my special assistants. I recommended Ms. Hill for her position at Oral Roberts University. I've always spoken highly of her. I had no reason prior to the FBI visiting me a little more than 2 weeks ago to know that she harbored any ill feelings toward me or any discomfort with me. This is all new to me.
It's new to me too, because I read the FBI report at least 10 or 15 times. I didn't see any of these allegations I'm about to go into, including that one. But she seemed to sure have a recollection here today. Now, did you ever say to Professor Hill in words or substance, and this is embarrassing for me to say in public, but it has to be done, and I'm sure it's not pleasing to you. Did you ever say in words or substance something like, "There is a pubic hair in my Coke"?
No, Senator.
Did you ever refer to your private parts in conversations with Professor Hill?
Absolutely not, Senator.
Did you ever brag to Professor Hill about your sexual prowess?
No, Senator.
Did you ever use the term long dong silver in conversation with Professor Hill?
No, Senator.
Did you ever have lunch with Professor Hill at which you talked about sex or pressured her to go out with you?
Absolutely not.
Did you ever
I have
tell
had no such discussions, nor have I ever pressured or asked her to go out with me beyond her work environment.
Did you ever tell Professor Hill that she should see pornographic films?
Absolutely not.
Did you ever talk about pornography with Professor Hill?
I did not discuss any pornographic material or pornographic preferences or pornographic films with Professor Hill.
So you never even talked or described pornographic materials with her?
Absolutely not.
Well, most of those are in addition.
What I have told you is precisely what I told the FBI on September 25th when they shocked me with the allegations made by Anita Hill.
Judge Thomas, those are a lot of allegations. Those are a lot of charges. Talking about sexual experiences and preferences, whether she liked or had ever done the same thing, oral sex, viewing films of people having sex with each other and with animals, that maybe she should see such films, discuss specific sex acts, talk about pubic hair and coke, talking about your private parts, bragging about sexual prowess, talking about particular pornographic movies. Let me ask you something. You have dealt with these problems for a long time. At one time, I was the chairman overviewing the EOC, and I might add the Department of Education. Now I'm the ranking member today, and I've known you for 11 years. And you're an expert because you're the person who made the arguments to the then Solicitor General Freed that the administration should strongly take a position on sexual harassment cases in the Meritor Savings Bank v. Vincent case. And the Supreme Court adopted your position. Did I misstate that?
Senator, what you've said is substantially accurate. What I attempted to do in my discussions with the solicitor is to have them be aggressive in that litigation. And the EEOC was very instrumental in the success in the Meritor case.
Now, Judge, keep in mind that the statute of limitations under Title VII for sexual harassment for private employers is 180 days or 6 months. But the statute of limitations under Title VII for federal employers and employees is 30 days. Are you aware of that?
Yes, Senator, I'm generally aware of those limitations.
And are you aware of why those statutes of limitation are so short?
I would suspect that at some point it would have to do with the decision by this body that either memories begin to fade or stories change, perhaps individuals move around. and it would be more difficult to litigate them. I don't know precisely what all of the rationale is.
Well, it involves the basic issue of fairness, just exactly how you have described it. If somebody is going to be accused in a unilateral declaration of sexual harassment, then that somebody ought to be accused through either a complaint or some sort of a criticism, so that somebody can be informed and then respond to those charges, and if necessary, change that somebody's conduct. Is that a fair statement?
I think that's fair, Senator.
Now let me ask you something. I described all kinds of what I consider to be gross, awful, sexually harassing things, which, if you take them in cumulation, have to gag anybody. Now, you've seen a lot of these sexual harassment cases as you've served there at the EEOC. What is your opinion with regard to what should have been done with those charges, and whether or not you believe that, let's take Professor Hill in this case, should have done something, since she was a Yale Law graduate who taught civil rights law at one point, served in these various agencies, and had to understand that there's an issue of fairness here?
Senator, if any of those activities occur, it would seem to me to clearly suggest or to clearly indicate sexual harassment. And anyone who felt that she was harassed could go to an EEO officer at any agency and have that dealt with confidentially. At the Department of Education, if she said it occurred there, or at EEOC. Those are separate tracks at EEOC. I do not get to review those if they involve me. And at the Department of Education, there's a separate EEO officer for the whole department. It would have nothing to do with me. But if I were an individual advising a person who'd been subjected to that treatment, I would advise her to immediately go to the EEO officer.
And the EEO office then would bring the parties together, or at least would confront the problem head on, wouldn't it?
The EEO officer would provide counseling.
Within a short period of time?
Within a short period of time, as well as, I think, if necessary, an actual charge.
So the charge would be made, and the charge would then, the person against whom it was made would have a chance to answer it right then, right up front, in a way that could resolve it and stop this type of activity if it ever really occurred.
That's right.
And you've just said it never really occurred.
It never occurred. That's why there was no charge.
See, one of the problems that has bothered me from the front of this thing is these are gross, accumulated. I don't know why anybody would put up with them. Anybody with another person who would do that. And if you did that, I don't know why anybody would work with you who suffered these treatments. Furthermore, I don't know why they would have gone to a different position with you. Even if they did think that maybe it had stopped and it won't start again, but then claim that it started again. And then when they finally got out into the private sector, wouldn't somehow or other confront these problems in 3 successive confirmation proceedings. Does that bother you?
This whole affair bothers me, Senator. I am witnessing the destruction of my integrity.
And it's by a unilateral set of declarations that are made on successive dates and differ. By one person who continued to maintain what she considered to be a, quote, cordial professional relationship with you over a 10-year period.
Senator, my relationship with Anita Hill prior to September 25th was cordial and professional. And I might add one other thing. If you really want an idea of how I treated women, then ask the majority of the women who worked for me. They're out here. Give them as much time as you have given one person, the only person who's been on my staff who's ever made these sorts of allegations about me.
Well, I think one of our senators, one of our better senators in the United States Senate, did do exactly that. And he's a Democrat. As a matter of fact, one of the fairest people, and I think one of the best new people in the whole Senate. This is a statement that was made on the floor of the Senate in this record by my distinguished colleague, Senator Lieberman, man I have a great deal of respect for. Senator Lieberman's staff conducted a survey of various women who have worked for you over the years. He was concerned. He's been a supporter of yours. And he was one who asked for this delay so that this could be looked into because he was concerned too. But as a result of the survey, Senator Lieberman made the following statement. He said, I have contacted associates, women who worked with Judge Thomas during his time at the Department of Education and EOC, and in the calls that I and my staff have made, there has been universal support for Judge Thomas and a clear indication by all of the women we spoke to that there was never, certainly not, a case of sexual harassment and not even a hint of impropriety. That was put into the congressional record on October 8, 1991. And I think Senator Lieberman has performed a very valuable service because he's in the other party. He's a person who looks at these matters seriously. He has to be as appalled by this type of accusation as I am. And frankly, he wanted to know just what kind of a guy is Clarence Thomas. And those of us who know you know that all of these are inconsistent with the real Clarence Thomas. And I don't care who testifies, you have to keep in mind this is an attorney, law graduate from one of the 4 or 5 best law schools in this land, very intelligent, articulate law professor, and the only person on earth other than you knowing whether these things are true. The only other person. I don't blame you for being mad.
Senator, I have worked with hundreds of women in different capacity. I have promoted and mentored dozens. I will put my record against any member of this committee in promoting and mentoring women.
I will put your record against anybody in the whole Congress.
And I think that if you want to really be fair, you parade every single one before you, and you ask them in their relationships with me whether or not any of this nonsense, this garbage, trash that you siphoned out of the sewers against me, whether any of it is true. Ask them. They've worked with me. Ask my chief of staff, my former chief of staff. She worked shoulder to shoulder with me.
Well, I think we should do that. Now, Judge, what was Professor Hill's role in your office at the Education Department and at the EEOC?
Senator, as I indicated this morning, at the Department of Education, Ms. Hill was an attorney advisor. I had a small staff, and she had the opportunity to work on a variety of issues.
She was your number one person?
She, by and large, on substantive issues, she was.
How about when you went to the EEOC?
At EEOC, that role changed drastically. As I indicated, my duties expanded immensely. EEOC, as you remember, had enormous management problems, so I focused on that. I also needed an experienced EEO staff, and my staff was much more mature. It was older. It was a more experienced staff. As a result, she did not enjoy that close a relationship with me, nor did she have her choice of the better assignments. And I think that as a result of that, there was some concern on her part that she was not being treated as well as she had been treated prior to that.
At any time in your tenure in the Department of Education, did Professor Hill ever express any concern about or discomfort with your conduct towards her?
No.
Never?
No. The only caveat I would add to that would be that from time to time people want promotions or better assignments or work hours, something of that nature, but no discomfort of the nature that is being discussed here today.
Now, I note that Professor Hill alleges improper conduct on your part during the period of November 1981 to February or March of 1982. Now, isn't it true that both you and Professor Hill moved from the Education Department to the EEOC in April of that same year?
Senator, that's an odd period. The President expressed his intent to nominate me to become chairman of EEOC in February of 1982. And during that very same period, to the best of my recollection, she assisted me in my nomination and confirmation process. And I did, in fact, leave actual work at the Department of Education, I believe in April, and started at EEOC in May of 1982. And she transferred with me.
So in other words, Professor Hill followed you to the EEOC no more than 2 or 3 months, possibly only 1 month after she claims this alleged conduct occurred.
Precisely.
Isn't it true, Judge Thomas, that Professor Hill could have remained in her job at the Education Department when you went to the EEOC?
To the best of my recollection, she was a Schedule A attorney. I know she was not cleared through the White House, so she was not a Schedule C. She was not a political appointee. As a result, she had all the rights of Schedule A attorneys and could have remained at the Department of Education in a career capacity.
And even if she might not have remained the #1 person to the head of the Civil Rights Division, which you were, she would have been transferred to another equivalent attorney's position.
If she had requested.
Did you tell her anything to the contrary?
Not to my knowledge. In fact, I don't think it ever came up.
She didn't even ask you?
I don't think it ever came up. I think it was understood that she would move to EEOC with me if she so desired.
I think just button it down. In other words, Judge Thomas, if instead of following you to the EEOC, Professor Hill had remained at the Department of Education as a Schedule A attorney, she would have had as much job security as any other civil service attorney in the government. And this is especially true, isn't it, because of your friendship with Harry Singleton?
That's right. If she was concerned about job security, I could have certainly discussed with Harry Singleton what should be done with him. He's a personal friend of mine. He's also, or was a personal friend of the individual who recommended Anita Hill to me, Gil Hardy. Gil Hardy, of course, drowned in 1988. But both of us, or all three of us, had gone to Yale Law School and knew each other quite well.
All right. Now, Judge Thomas, I understand that on occasion, and you correct me if this is wrong, but I've been led to believe that on occasion, Professor Hill would ask you to drive her home, and that on those occasions she would sometimes invite you into her home to continue a discussion. But you never thought of anything, you never thought of any of this as anything but a more than normal, friendly or professional conversation with a colleague. Am I correct on that, or am I wrong?
It was not unusual to me, Senator. As I remember it, I lived in Southwest Washington and would, as I remember, and again, I'm relying on my recollection, she lived someplace on Capitol Hill, and I would drive her home and sometimes stop in and have a Coke or a beer or something and continue arguing about politics for maybe 45 minutes to an hour, but I never thought anything of it.
When Professor Hill worked for you at the EEOC, did she solicit your advice on career development or career opportunities?
Senator, as I discuss with most of the members of my personal staff, I try to advise them on their career opportunities and what they should do next. You can't always be a special assistant or an attorney advisor. And I am certain that I had those discussions with her. And in fact, it would probably have been based on that I advised Dean Cothe that she would be a good teacher and that she would be interested in teaching.
Did she treat you as as her mentor at the time, in your opinion?
Pardon me?
Did she treat you as though you were a mentor at the time?
She certainly sought counsel and advice from me.
Now, at any time during your tenure at the EEOC, did you ever discuss sexual matters with Professor Hill?
Absolutely not, Senator.
At any time during your tenure at the EEOC, did Professor Hill ever express discomfort or concern about your conduct towards her?
No, Senator.
From your observations, What was the perception of Professor Hill by her colleagues at the EEOC? What did they think about her?
Senator, some of my former staffers, I assume, will testify here, but as I remember it, there was some tension and some degree of friction, which I attributed simply to having a staff. As I've had 2 weeks to think about this and to agonize over this. And as I remember it, I believe that she was considered to be somewhat distant and perhaps aloof. And from time to time, there would be problems that usually involved, and I attributed this to just being young, but usually involved her taking a firm position and being unyielding to the other members of the staff, and then storming off or throwing a temper tantrum of some sort that either myself or the chief of staff would have to iron out.
What was your opinion of the quality of Professor Hill's work at the EEOC as her administrator and as the head of the EEOC?
I thought the work was good. The problem was and it wasn't a problem, was it was not as good as some of the other members of the staff.
While Professor Hill worked for you at the EEOC, did she ever seek a promotion?
I believe she did seek promotions. Again, most of that was done through the chief of staff at that time.
Well, if so, to what position?
She may have sought a promotion. In 1983, my chief of staff left, and I was going to promote someone to my executive assistant / chief of staff, which is the most senior person on my personal staff. And I think that, and again, I'm relying on my memory, she aspired to that position and, of course, was not successful, and I think was concerned about that.
I see. When did Professor Hill leave the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission?
In '83.
In '83. Why do you think she decided to leave the agency at that time?
Senator, I thought that she felt that at the time that it was time for her to leave Washington and also to leave government. And she had, I believe, expressed an interest in teaching, and the opportunity at Oral Roberts University provided her both with the opportunity to be in Oklahoma and to teach. And as I remember it, she did not lose any salary or any income in the bargain, and that was attractive.
Excuse me, did you assist her in getting that job at Oral Roberts University?
Yes, Senator. I discussed her with Dean Charles Cothe, both informally and provided written recommendation, formal recommendation for her.
All right. Have you had any contacts with Professor Hill since she left the EEOC in 1983?
Senator, from time to time, Anita Hill would call the agency and either speak to me or to my secretary, and through her she would leave messages. They had been friends, Diane Holt. And on a number of occasions, I believe two, I'm certain of one, but maybe two, when I was in Tulsa, Oklahoma, I spent time with her. I saw her, and I believe on one occasion she drove me to the airport and had breakfast with me.
Mr. Chairman, with unanimous consent, I would introduce into the record at this point excerpts from Judge Thomas's telephone logs from 1983 to 1991, if I could.
Without objection.
Now, Judge Thomas, could you take a copy of these? Do you have a copy of these?
These are the same excerpts that we have had.
These are the same ones that you have had. Now, Judge Thomas, are you familiar with these?
I have seen those logs, Senator.
Okay. Do you recall any of the telephone conversations with Professor Hill reflected by these particular messages?
I do, Senator.
For instance, on January 31st, according to these logs, and I think I've got them correct, I'm quite sure. On January 31st, 1984, at 11:30 a.m., a message from Anita Hill, quote, "Just called to say hello. Sorry she didn't get to see you last week," unquote. Is that accurate?
Yes, that was, I think, one instance when she had come to town either on personal business or because of her job, and my schedule conflicted with her, with any opportunity to meet with her. and simply called to, that was a call from her, I think, to reflect that.
Okay, number 2, on May 9th, 1984 at 11:40 a.m., Anita Hill was the caller. The message was, please call. And she left her phone number, 718, etc. Do you remember that?
Yes, Senator.
Number 3, on August 29th, 1984 at 3:59 p.m., Anita called, and the message was, quote, needs your advice in getting research grants, unquote. Do you recall that?
I remember that,
What was
Senator.
that all about?
I can't remember exactly what the project was, but she wanted some ideas as to how she could get, I think, some grants either from EEOC or some other agency to do some research, I believe, at Oral Roberts. And I believe we discussed that, and I may have put her in contact with someone. My recollection of that is vague, but we did have a discussion.
Did you help her?
I tried.
You tried. Number 4, on August 30th, 1984 at 11:55 a.m., Anita was the caller. Message, returns your call. Call between 1 and 4. You remember that?
I don't remember the specifics of the call, but I remember that on the log, Senator.
Was she calling you, or were you calling her?
She was calling me. My secretary, when I placed a call and someone returned it, my secretary noted, returned your call.
Okay, on January 3rd, 1985 at 3:40 p.m., Anita Hill was the caller. Quote, please call tonight, and then left a phone number and a room number. Do you remember that?
I remember that. I think she must have been in town on a trip, and that was her hotel room number. I don't know which hotel. And I, again, may have been out of town on either a business trip or somehow, for some other reason, inaccessible or unavailable.
Number 6, February 26, 1985, 5:50 p.m. Anita Hill was the caller. Again, it said, please call. Another call from her to you?
That's right.
Number 7, on March 4th, 1985 at 11:15 a.m., Anita Hill called again, quote, please call Ray Research Project, unquote. You remember that?
I remember that, Senator.
Did you help her?
We did. I think I can't remember the details, but I think she and Dean Charles Cothe were involved in some research, a fairly large project, and wanted some data from EEOC, and I think we provided them with that data.
Number 8, March 4th, 1985, 11:25 a.m., call from Susan Cahill. Quote, with Tulsa EEO office referred by Anita to see if you would come to Tulsa on 3/27 to speak at the EEO conference, unquote. Do you remember that?
Yes, I remember the message. I think that was, she would not otherwise have gotten through to me and used Anita's name in order to gain access to me and perhaps receive a positive response.
Mr. Chairman, I know my time's just about up, but I just want to finish this one line if I can.
You have all the time you want.
All right, thanks. I really appreciate that. Number 9. Number 9 is July 5th, 1985 at 1:30 p.m. Anita Hill, the caller. Please call, with a number clearly out of town. Remember that?
Again, I remember reviewing my log, Senator.
Okay, number 10. October 8th, 1986, 12:25 p.m. Anita Hill called, message, please call, leaving a 405 area code number. Remember that?
Yes, Senator.
Number 11, August 4th, 1987, 4 o'clock p.m. Anita Hill caller. Quote, in town till 8:15, wanted to congratulate you on your marriage, unquote. Do you remember that?
I remember that, Senator, because one of the, my wife and I were on a delayed honeymoon in California when she came to town.
Number 12, November 1st, 1990, 11:40 a.m. Anita Hill, caller, Ray speaking engagement at University of Oklahoma School of Law. Remember that?
That was since I've been on the Court of Appeals, Senator.
There were 12 phone calls between 1983 and 1990. Did you try to call her back each time?
Senator, I try to, whenever I received calls from her or from others, I attempted to return those calls. Although, as I indicated before you started through those series of calls, I remember the messages in the log themselves. I don't remember the nature of each call. It would be my practice to return those calls, especially from someone such as Anita.
So each and every time she called, you tried to call her back and tried to help her?
Senator, that is, the log reflects only those calls where she was unsuccessful in reaching me.
Did you ever call her other than to return these calls?
Senator, I may have. Again, Anita Hill was someone that I respected and was cordial toward and felt positive toward and hopeful for her career. And I may have, on occasion, and I can't remember any specific occasion, picked up the phone just to see how she was doing. But again, the calls that you have there are the calls that are reflected or that reflect her inability to get in touch with me when she had called, as opposed to the instances in which she was able to contact me successfully.
Judge Thomas, before this day, have you seen Professor Hill on various occasions since she left the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission?
Yes, Senator. As I indicated, I recall seeing her, I'm certain of one time and perhaps twice, in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And on one of those occasions, it is my recollection that we had dinner with Charles Cothe. We also had Charles Cothe, the dean of.
But was she there at that dinner?
She was at the dinner. We also had, we being Anita and myself, breakfast with Charles Cothe at his house. I usually slept at Charles Cothe's house, and I believe she drove me to the airport. And for some reason, I seem to remember that she had a Peugeot. I could be wrong on that. But I remember her being very proud of it because, to my recollection, she did not have a car in Washington.
I see. These, in addition to all the phone calls, you had these contacts and these meetings. How would you describe these meetings?
Very cordial, positive, always one. It's, as I treat my other special assistants, I tend to be the proud father type who sees his special assistants go on and become successful and feels pretty good about it. It would be that kind of a contact, as well as her telling me how her teaching assignments were going. Indeed, that was similar to the conversation, again, that I would have with my other special assistants, or former special assistants.
Overall, how would you characterize the nature of your contacts with Professor Hill since she left the EEOC in 1983?
They've been always very cordial and very positive, Senator.
Any unpleasantness?
Never.
Any problems ever raised?
No, Senator.
Any questions about your conduct?
No, Senator.
Can you think of any reason for her efforts to continue to try to be associated with you?
Senator, could you repeat the question, Senator?
Well, can you think of any real reason why she would want to continue these cordial professional relationship with you, or this cordial professional relationship with you?
Senator, I would hope it would have been for the same reasons that all of my other special assistants did, that I was very supportive of them. The people that, some of whom you will hear from today, who've flown in, certainly at their own expense, they feel warmly toward me and have a sense of loyalty, and feel that I will help them and that I will assist them as best I could. And I believe that that was a part of the reason, and we certainly enjoyed a cordial and professional relationship.
Well, before you first heard of Professor Hill's allegations during this confirmation process, did you have any reason to believe that she was unhappy with you?
Senator, on Tuesday, on September 24th, the day before I heard from the FBI, I would have told you, if you asked me, that my relationship with Anita Hill was cordial, professional, and that I was very proud of her for all she'd done with her life and the things that she had accomplished.
Judge Thomas, this is your fourth confirmation in 9 years, isn't that correct?
Yes, Senator. It's either my... Yes, Senator, it is.
In fact, 3 of those confirmations occurred, I guess they were after, including this one, occurred after these allegations, at the time of the allegations by Professor Hill.
Actually, this, Senator, would be the fourth on the...
That's right, isn't it? It would be
this
the fourth.
would be the fourth.
So she actually has known you through 4 Senate confirmations. 4 of them.
This is the fifth.
No, this is the 4th. Through 4 Senate confirmations, right?
That's right.
And none of those have been very easy, have they?
That's right. Now that I think about it, none of my confirmations, aside from the first one, was easy.
And you had your critics in each and every one of them, didn't you?
That's right.
Do you remember the details of each of those calls that were made that we went over? Or do you just remember them generally?
I remember the calls generally, Senator. I don't remember the specifics of each call. That's been quite some time.
Well, let me just say this. I've kept everybody too long, and I know we can continue tomorrow. But I'd like to ask this question just to end the day with, and I think it's an important question. I have to say, cumulatively, these charges, even though they were made on all kinds of occasions, I mean, they're unbelievable that anybody could be that perverted. I'm sure there are people like that, but they're generally in insane asylums. What was your reaction when you first heard of these allegations against you? Just the first allegations, not all these other ones. And then you can tell me your reaction when you've heard of these ones that were brought forth the first time today.
Senator, when the FBI informed me of the allegation, the person first, there was shock, dismay, hurt, pain, and when he informed me of the nature of the allegations, I was surprised, it was disbelief, and again hurt, and I have reached a point over the last 2 weeks plus, I've reached a point that I can't go over each and every one of these allegations again. As I said in my statement this morning, that when you have allegations of this nature by someone that you think and felt, it is an enormously painful experience. And you rip at yourself. What could you have done? And why could this happen? Or why would it happen?
How do you feel right now, Judge, after what you've been through?
Senator, as I indicated this morning, it just isn't worth it. The nomination isn't worth it. Being on the Supreme Court isn't worth it. There is no amount of money that's worth it. There's no amount of money that can restore my name. Being an Associate Justice of the Supreme Court will never replace what I've been robbed of. And I wouldn't recommend that anyone go through it. And this has been an enormously difficult experience, but I don't think that that's the worst of it. I'm 43 years old, and if I'm not confirmed, I'm still the youngest member of the U.S. Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit. I'll go on. I'll go back to my life of talking to my neighbors and cutting my grass and getting a Big Mac at McDonald's. and driving my car, seeing my kid play football. I'll live. I'll have my life back. And all this hurt has brought my family and I closer, my wife and I, my mother. But that isn't, so there's no pity for me. I think the country has been hurt by this process. I think we are destroying our country, we are destroying our institutions, and I think it's a sad day when the U.S. Senate can be used by interest groups and hate mongers and people who are interested in digging up dirt to destroy other people and who will stop at no tactics when they can use our great institutions for their own political ends. We are gone far beyond McCarthyism. This is far more dangerous than McCarthyism. At least McCarthy was elected.
Judge, I have a lot of other questions to ask you, and I think they're important questions. And I think you deserve the opportunity to tell your side of this. And you've done it here so far. And I have to tell you, this has come down to this. One woman's allegations that are 10 years old against your lifetime of service over that same 10-year period. Now, I've known you almost 11 years. And the person that the good professor described is not the person I've known. And we're going to talk a little bit more about this tomorrow and about what went on there and about how this could have happened, how one person's allegations, uncorroborated, nobody else, it's all private, according to her, could tend to destroy a career and one of the most wonderful opportunities for a young man from Pinpoint, Georgia. Something that I think has lifted almost everybody up till these allegations were unfairly disclosed by someone on this committee and/or their staff, maybe on this committee. And Mr. Chair,
I repeat what I said. I have been hurt by this deeply, and nothing is worth going through this. This has devastated me. It's devastated my family. It's untrue. They're lies. I have hundreds of women who've worked with me. You can call them. Dozens who worked closely with me on my personal staff. You can call them. You can bring them up, give them as much airtime as you've given this one person with uncorroborated, scurrilous lies and allegations. Give them as much time. See what they say.
well,
But it's not just that, Senator. It's more that's happened. You are ruining the country. If it can happen to me, it can happen to anybody, anytime, over any issue. Our institutions are being controlled by people who will stop at nothing. They went around this country looking for dirt, not information on Clarence Thomas, dirt. Anybody with any dirt, anything, late night calls, calls at work, calls at home, badgering, anything, give us some dirt. I think that if our country has reached this point, we're in trouble, and you should feel worse for the country than you do for me.
I feel bad for both. Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry I've kept us over a little bit. I wish I could proceed even further tonight, but I think we'll wait till tomorrow morning. I know everybody's dead tired, and I'm sure you're dead tired. I know that. So, Mr. Chairman, thank you for giving me this extra time. You've always been courteous and decent, and frankly, you've run this committee through this whole process in a courteous and decent way, including you ran it right with regard to the FBI report as well. And We on this side know that, so thank you.